One question I had for you is um, some non-dual speakers, they talk about how the idea of spiritual teaching in itself is dualistic, because it's kind of like saying that the person is not already awakened. What are your thoughts on that?
Of course it is. Who cares? Like you said, some spiritual teachers say that teaching is dualistic. Yeah, but that's a dualistic teaching right there. You see, so someone who says that, they're not out of the dualistic teaching thing. They're still in it. They're just using a particular kind of word. So yeah, dualism doesn't mean wrong or bad. Um, Duality is just is part of life. It's a way of seeing and experiencing life. And a lot of duality gets pawned off as non-duality. That's probably a good place to start. So dual, duality would be to see thing would be a way of discounting any duality. Like, oh, that's just dualistic, as if like that has no reality in somebody's lives, right? Duality has place in someone's lives all the time, every single day. Um, so it's not a matter of like, switching allegiance from duality to non-duality, or seeing people as everybody is awake or everybody is asleep. Like the real vision sees that everybody is innately always and already uh, awake, or always and already Buddhas, and yet that doesn't do them any good if they don't know that, right? So you can be awake and asleep at the same time. Now, that doesn't make sense to someone's mind, but then again, non-duality doesn't make sense to a logical mind, right? How can somebody be awake and asleep at the same time? Well, you can see them as a full and complete Buddha or a full and complete manifestation of God, and as that manifestation, they can seem to be quite confused and asleep. So you can have both at the same time, um, which is, to me anyway, that's what non-duality really is. It's not a dismissal of the dual aspect of life. It's a vision that includes it and goes beyond it, right? So duality becomes encompassed in a bigger view. It doesn't simply get uh, eliminated.
Some of them say that it's not possible to give a practice to someone, or like someone could do a practice of a certain teaching and still not have an awakening in their lifetime.
Sure, they could. Someone could do all the spiritual practices, do them with total dedication, and they may never awaken. That's true. But it just so happens that about 95% of the people that awaken were involved in a spiritual practice or a spiritual discipline that I meet. Probably 95% is at least 95%. I met people that didn't do any practice, but 90%, 95% did. And the people that do, their awakening tends to sort of stick and land in a deeper way. So, sure, anybody can awaken at any time. There's no direct causal relationship between what you or I do, say in our spiritual practice, and awakening. We can't manufacture it like like following a 3-step program and then the 4th step is you awaken. But that doesn't mean that what we do has no relationship to awaken. It just means it has an indirect relationship. And I think that's one of the mistakes that gets made. Like, there's no causal relationship. What they really mean is there's no direct causal relationship, but there's indirect causal relationships, right? Because everything is related to everything else. And because that's the case, that's also kind of a world of indirect causal relationships. So I think the thing is, Soma, is what I find is really important is to make a distinction between I see teachings, spiritual teachings, they're most benignly related to as sort of strategies. Does this help awakening? But what we keep mistaking is we keep mistaking the teaching, which is essentially a strategy in its best sense, for a statement of the absolute truth. Right? And that's really easy to do when you're teaching, because you're teaching a lot, you're talking a lot, and you can start to think that what you're saying is actually the absolute truth, right? When it's actually not. At best, it's maybe a useful strategy. So with one person, you might say, like, yeah, you don't have to do anything to wake up. Just stop all this struggling and striving and all the spiritual practices you're doing and, all of that. And that may actually work as a kind of strategy to help them awaken. But somebody else that's lazy, let's say, they've heard there's nothing they can do and there's nowhere they can go. And so they're just cracking a beer, sitting on the couch, waiting for something to happen. That person, I would say, okay, you're probably going to be sitting on that couch 50 years from now with a bad alcohol problem and totally unawake. So you might want to get up and actually, contribute, actually put yourself out and do something. So yeah, I think it's, number one, it's individual. And the way I relate to any spiritual teaching is it useful? Not, is it absolutely true? Because no teaching's going to be absolutely true, because you can't put the truth of anything into an idea, even a whole host of really complicated ideas, right? Then if we have them as strategies, then we don't have to really sit around wondering, okay, which is the truth, which is not the truth, what's real, what's not real. We start to relate to it as a sense of, is this teaching helpful to me? Is it useful? And if it, then it's, you're relating to a teaching in a more pragmatic sense rather than a sort of philosophical sense. And I think when people do that, it saves them immense amount of time and energy, especially in the modern day, when you have access to just almost an infinite variety of spiritual teachings. And a lot of people are walking around trying to put them all together in their mind, like, well, this guy says this, and this woman says this, and this teacher says that, and that tradition says that, and they all seem to contradict each other. Now, which one's true, right? Or if I could just put all the pieces together in my mind like a jigsaw puzzle, I'm sure it would make sense. That's really common nowadays because we have so much access to teaching. But again, I think when we look at the teachings more as strategies, useful strategies that help us awaken, then we don't have to waste a lot of time trying to put all the theological puzzle pieces together, unless we just like theology.